Hello, everyone, and welcome to Out of This World with me, Jamie Hanshaw, and Kristin Lagan. And tonight we are going to talk about science and science experiments and the worst of what science has wrought in the world. Last week, we went out of this world with Enoch, and that was super fun. We went up and down and through all the dimensions and to heaven and hell. And tonight we are going to talk about crazy science experiments, the most evil, disgusting, nasty, bad things. And the books that we are going to be covering are World as Laboratory. I've got a book here on Dolphins by John C. Lilly.
Ooh, fun.
That story. I've got Physical Control of the Mind by Jose Delgado. And Kristin has brought 5 experiments, and I've brought 5 experiments, and we are going to do the top 10 most evil science experiments.
I feel like yours are going to be a lot more gnarly than mine are.
I don't know. I was so excited because I'd never heard of yours, even through searching like my own. When you texted me what yours were going to be, I was like, well, awesome, because I haven't even come across these. So I'm really excited.
All right. Yeah. Cool. I don't feel like I feel like I could have gone like dark serial killer government type of stuff, but this is more like, I mean, it's just wild science experiments that the government has been a part of.
Right. So this week I actually did a show for InfoWars called The World's a Stage. And in that show, I was trying to prove that politicians and Hollywood are intrinsically linked and not that different at all. And tonight we are going to talk about the world as the great petri dish, or the culture media, as they call it. And the American experiment, as they say, is the possibility to regulate human beings so that people would do whatever they were instructed to do. And let's talk about behaviorism before we get into our top 10. What they were trying to accomplish was to create a population that would die for a cause when they were told to. They would shop when they were told to, that would be supportive of social movements when they were told to. Does that sound familiar at all?
No. Tell me more.
Well, you have to listen to me. I'm a scientist, right? I've got the pen.
I know
I've got the white coat.
Your pen's really like, that's your badge.
Yes.
That's how I know you're serious.
I am infallible tonight because I'm wearing the white coat.
That's right.
So 20th century science was primarily focused on human behavior and social engineering and behavior modification and mind control. So before that, philosophers and scientists argued a materialistic worldview, a mechanical worldview, a view that the universe was just a series of moving parts that could be taken apart and studied and put back together. Darwinism and things like that. So they were promoting things like human-like machines and machine-like humans. And this is 19th century science, 19th century, before even the 20th century started. They were obsessed with the mechanical nature of things. They dreamed of things like automated animals, automated servants, things that mimic real life but could be controlled by an operator. And I wrote a chapter in my first book called Sorcerers and Robots about how sorcerers love mind control. They love to be able to be the puppeteer of everyone around them. So Freud's popular...
That reminds me of like Fantasia, you know, and like the scene where Mickey Mouse is instructing the broom on what to do.
Exactly.
Just like through mind control.
Yes, exactly. And Fantasia is used in mind control. I have a whole article, and it's called like how to brainwash your friends and family. And it's a
Ooh.
step-by-step guide using Fantasia as a guide. So Freud's popular psychoanalysis was harnessed for a new field called behaviorism, which was to replace old forms of social order such as religion and family tradition. So science, oh, I'm so sick of everyone saying, follow the science, follow the science. And they just act like science is this great, objective, infallible, altruistic thing with no ulterior motives. And that's just not true, right?
No, but I have to interject really quick because
Uh,
your background is so great. And I have this cat
I
like
love the cat.
throwing herself just like everywhere in the background. So
That's
I have to
perfect.
just acknowledge the fact that yes, we see her and all that she's doing right
You
now.
see a kitty. What's the kitty's name?
That is Gigi. She's a
Gigi.
kitten. She's about 6 months old.
Star of the show, Gigi. I love her.
Yeah, yeah.
So, science is not a logical, objective alternative. Even if a scientist had no emotion like Spock, this is a form of sociopath personality disorder, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, science tried to reduce the universe to all of its mechanical parts. And let's talk just a little bit about a guy named John B. Watson. So
Mm.
here's somebody that I hadn't heard about in all of my studies, but he was one such scientist. He was a behaviorist from Johns Hopkins who went to work on Madison Avenue advertising. So it was said that there was nothing that he couldn't sell. And he was the inspiration for globalist Bertrand Russell's book called Philosophy. His experiments with babies rendered the term fear-based conditioning, and he believed
Wow.
that fear was the most powerful force that shaped a person's life. So this is straight from the laboratory to Madison Avenue advertising to your living room, your magazines, your commercials, everything emotional based drives to get you to consume, and the biggest one of these is fear.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
he used the emotional appeal in advertising because it didn't matter what you were selling. It could be hot dogs or life insurance, but the techniques were the same. So he was a weirdo. He dreamed of having baby farms where he could have groups of purebloods of different races to conduct experiments on.
Wow. Okay.
Um,
He sounds like a gem.
yes. So he was a pioneer of what they called rat learning.
Okay. He
And
pioneered that.
this makes me think of Disney, who we're going to talk about next week because they're in the news. But when you have all these people running around wearing mouse ears, I think that that's like an inside joke that all these people are just experimental lab rats, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Especially children.
Yeah.
So the white rat was the first species in history to be domesticated for science because no one cared what happened to rats. And then they picked a couple other animals too. They chose like rhesus monkeys, some guinea pigs, and bunnies, um, things that people don't really have an emotional connection to.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what they're doing animal testing on. Yeah, so they could castrate them, they could surgically alter them, they could blind them, drug them, and no one would give a hoot about lab rats, right?
Yeah.
So then by the 1930s, the maze rat experiments were super popular, and behaviorism was the macrocosm of the rat maze. So they thought that if they could understand everything about how rats work and how to control them, they could apply this to populations.
Yeah.
So then in 1939, the Rockefeller Foundation gave the Yale Institute of Human Relations $12 million, which is equivalent to like $500 million today,
Mm.
to conduct the most expensive social science project ever undertaken. And that is all of these rats. So they had this entire compound with all of these rat mazes.
Mm.
And I wish I had written this down, but there was a social experiment about the beautiful rats. So maybe you can Google that. It starts with a C. Jay knows. Um, they did this experiment where if you give all the rats everything that they need, like universal basic income would be for humans if all the needs of the rats were met, that they would like section off into these different groups, and there'd be these rats that didn't do anything. They just like sat there preening themselves, and they call them the beautiful ones.
Ooh.
So if you're interested in
Yeah, I just pulled it
that.
up.
Oh, okay. What's it called?
Um, it's called The Beautiful One, the Calhoun Experiment.
Calhoun experiment. That's it. That's it.
The Calhoun's rodent utopia.
Rodent utopia. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that looks really interesting. Because I remember being in grad school and, I was in for psychology. And so we studied behaviorism and we would study all of these experiments. And it was always a rat study
Mm-hmm.
or, how addiction started or, what withdrawals look like with rats. And I have such a heart for animals that, I mean, some of the experiments were really sad. And I just, starving
Animals.
them and torturing them. It was just awful. I
Yes.
mean,
I
do
think
it, but
that's the satanic part of this is torturing animals. Definitely. I mean, people are more important, yes, but just taking something apart that's living just to study it is not right, in my opinion.
yeah, like I remember studying about it's in a Jordan Peterson book about a Japanese like prison or Japanese they would like experiment on like humans that were alive.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, don't look this up. And of course, he's, you look it up because he's like, don't look this up. It's so horrific. I forgot about that for tonight, but that was something we should probably talk about. I might change mine out.
Well,
But yeah,
I
it's,
find whatever they were doing to animals first, later on, they would get people
yeah,
to be the
absolutely.
subjects.
Like, let's see. And that's one of my experiment or my evil experiments was precisely that. It's
Okay.
like taking people with mentally challenged conditions and having no regard for the fact that they are a consciousness and they're alive.
Mm-hmm. So, along with the other animals, the Institute was looking for a grand theory that would explain human behavior and make it predictable and thereby controllable. And they believe they could explain every human thing from love to war with the help of experiments on rats. And what they found was that they could get an animal to rewire itself under conditions of escalating stress. So
Mm.
I found in this book has a picture of these poor rats. Do you see that?
Oh,
So it says rats at the Institute of Human Relations were electrically shocked on a charged wire grid until they displayed fighting behavior. They had to attack each other for the current to stop. Soon they attacked each other automatically as soon as they were placed on the grid, even with the current off. Next, one of the rats was removed and a celluloid doll put in the cage. Now the rat attacked the doll instead. This was seen as an experimentally created version of scapegoating and other human responses in which frustration generates aggression, and that response is transferred to another object. So, what they're saying is that you can make populations frustrated and angry and attacking a straw man or whatever you put in the cage because they don't know that the current is coming from somewhere else.
that's so great to
Yeah.
understand the foundation of, and what's so fascinating, and I'm sure you saw this too, but as I was looking up these experiments, they all took place in like the 1950s, 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not, if we're doing this stuff in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, I mean, this is an obvious statement, but like, there's no, it's so funny to me because people would be like, there's no way that, why would they want to hurt X, Y, and Z? Or just like, there's so much evidence and there's so many examples of why you should have open eyes to pharmaceutical companies and
Yep.
people telling you what you should think and how you should feel about certain things.
Yes, because you said it. We are right in the middle of the biggest science experiment in history. And I'm not going to say details because you know what I'm talking about, but we're smack dab, and we are the lab rats
Yeah.
that are getting stabbed and poked and prodded. And, you know, that current
But
is shocking us, and we are attacking the wrong thing.
it's fascinating to me. I've never thought about putting on the ears and going to Disney, and then it's like a symbolic gesture of like, I
Yeah.
am a rat.
Yes.
And you know those people that, or I'm a mouse, or whatever you want to be. Um, you know, there is a certain population in the world that goes to Disney like every single year.
Yeah.
They're like addicted to it.
Yeah.
And I don't understand what's happening there, but to a degree, I'm like, have they had did they get under a spell? Like, why do you, as an adult, why do you want to get married at Disneyland? Or why do
Mm-hmm.
you want to go there every single, all the time?
Mm-hmm. That is something we are going to talk about in depth next week.
Next week.
We're going to do
Yay.
Walt, Walt Disney Hollywood's Dark Prince.
Yep.
So, we're talking about conditions of escalating stress. Who doesn't feel that today? I think everybody feels that. And the doctor who came up with, I don't know if he coined this word, but his experiments were about anxiety, and his name was Dr. O. Hobart Mowrer. And he was a pioneer of comparative psychology, and his behavioral experiments proved that a cycle of pain, relief, anticipation could lead to the ultimate demoralization of a creature. So basically, they had these rats. They would give them something painful like a shock. And then right after that, they would be a little relieved because it was over. But their relief started to wear off because they knew another shock was coming. And this is called anticipation or anxiety. And that would build up, and they would get the shock, relief, anxiety for the next one, like that. So when you continue to do this to a creature, they're basically a cease of function is what happens. Like their nervous system would break down. They would have, if you can give an animal a nervous breakdown by doing this, and so to a person.
Wow.
In humans, these cycles they found out could be induced by symbols. One could instill a new pattern of behavior using words, images, and social incentives and unpredictable pain. Does that sound like
That sounds eerily
modern society
familiar.
right now? So,
Yeah.
here were the most promising young scientists with all the money in the world at this immensely funded institute, and they were busy creating scenarios of ultimate demoralization. Does that sound right? Or
Sounds right for the times. Sounds right
great.
for our times.
Yeah. So I have this quote. Let's see. Okay. It says the key to Maury's success was his elaboration of an overarching state of affairs he called anxiety, not simple strings of stimulus response reactions. He talked about a pervasive effect, an atmosphere, or what he called later a feedback system that brought about radical change in the animal subject and did not have to be strenuously imposed from the outside once it took on a life of its own. So, this anxiety can be residual for a long time and still get the effect and the outcome that they're looking for. It said this capacity to be made uncomfortable by the mere prospect of traumatic experiences in advance of their actual occurrence or recurrence, and to be motivated thereby to take realistic precautions against them, is unquestionably a tremendously important and useful psychological mechanism. So, they are traumatizing people to get them into lockstep,
Yeah.
right? This doctor went on to work for the OSS, which became the CIA. And he was responsible for the idea that human beings only consist of basic animal instincts like drive, cue, response, reward. And this is the pattern that they use to control people.
Would those just let's acknowledge and reward and take away and
Learn the drive, trigger that basic need or want, get them to do something, and then reward them for doing that.
Give them a little bit of hope
Mm-hmm.
and take that away, and then
Yes.
give them a little bit of hope again.
Yes. So then, one last thing before we get into our actual science experiments was that I wanted to make the point that the theater of war itself is research and development. And this gives scientists and researchers the opportunity to commit crimes against humanity that are swept under the rug because of the whole war itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So during the Korean War, Operation Little Switch was the first exchange of POWs from North Korea. The doctors came up with the 3Ds to explain what had happened to them. So first is debility of the prisoner, like starvation, wounding, disease, anything that makes them disabled. And then dependency on the captors for basic need of survival, which is kind of what they're trying to push now with
Dependency.
stimulus
Yep.
and things like that. Your basic needs are going to be met, but they're going to be met by these evil captors. And then dependency, and then dread, which is the chronic fear that the captors are going to take away your basic survival needs. So total compliance came from the ultimate demoralization by the skillful application and withdrawal of stress conditions.
Wow.
And
yeah, I mean, if you can get somebody's nervous system into a state of fear,
yes,
I mean, you're controlling them immediately.
And this was all the way back. This rat stuff started in 1892 and then kind of peaked in 1939, right before World War II.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So.
Y'all, my cat is out of control tonight. So sorry
Let her
about
do her kitty thing. That's cool.
She wants to just be on the screen with us so bad.
She's going to be a star.
Yeah, she just really wants to be up here with me.
So, ultimate experiments, I have the long list and the short list. I wanted to mention CHEMTRAILS is one of the biggest experiments.
Hold on, that CHIM?
CHEMTRAILS.
I'm slow.
That's okay. And stabbies, obviously. Did you figure
Are
out?
you talking about these tonight?
No, I'm just saying these
Okay.
are big ones.
Okay.
CHEM trails.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Like, just they're in such different camps. I'm like, where is she? Is there like my mind is in like a super spy, secret lab underground. I'm like, a chemical lab somewhere? What?
Yeah. No, it's in the sky.
Ah,
It's
never heard of it. I have no idea what you're talking about.
So what was the first experiment that you found?
So the first one I was going to talk about tonight is Operation Sea Spray.
Okay.
So this is a pretty common. I might have to like take her into the other room because it's kind of out of control. She won't leave me alone.
It's my kitty for science. We're gonna do some experiments.
Yeah, I'm gonna put her in a science lab with rats. So Operation Sea Spray, it was conducted by the government or the army in the 1950s. I feel like everything was happening back then that is now easy to find. And this will be like in, even in like 50 to 60 years from now, I don't think things are going to be easy to find. I think they're just going to continue to cover up. And even like if I were to Google some of these topics, or not Google, but YouTube, you know how things will auto-populate? Like I had to put the entire word in for me to be able to like search it, and then things would finally start popping up. But so I have this was a biological warfare experiment conducted on humans in the San Francisco Bay Area in 1950. It was a U.S. Navy secret experiment that was carried out from September 20th to the 27th, so for 7 days. They determined how vulnerable, so they were nervous about bioweapon, like chemical attack after World War I. I really think I might need to put her away. Like, she won't leave me alone. Can we pause it? Or like, give me
Just
2
go do
seconds.
what you have to do now. I'll
Okay.
talk.
Okay. Sorry. Like 2
Bye,
seconds.
Kitty.
Bye.
So we mentioned the CHEMTRAILS, and I wanted to also just throw in some who's who of nasty science men. You've got Cornelius Rhodes, who did plutonium experiments on people. You've got the Milgram experiment. That's a pretty famous one where they. Are you back?
I'm back.
Okay, so the Milgram experiment, you've got the Well of Despair, it's called, where they separated monkeys from their mothers to see how they would react to solitude. It was really depressing. You've got the Stanford Prison experiment. You've got Agent ORANGE in the Vietnam War. And don't forget Mr. Mengele himself, Dr. Joseph Mengele, the butcher of Auschwitz, who was probably the most insane mad scientist to ever exist. He was literally like doing the worst experiments, and his research became MK Ultra through Project Paperclip. And it's just like, take your worst fear and multiply that by infinity, and that's what he was doing. Like literally like human centipede stuff, because he loved twins and he loved Siamese twins and surgically stitching people together, literally.
I cannot.
Yeah, that's like the who's who of mad scientists. But go on, Operation Sea Spray.
Okay, to something a little. So yeah, so I thought this was fascinating because they sprayed this bacteria over the San Francisco Bay population. And this bacteria, when people would go in, it was commonly found in respiratory and urinary tract infections. So they were like, oh yeah, it's always the same bacteria. So they were spraying this over the general population, and it obviously no one knew about it, and they wanted to see in this concentrated area, would it have any effect? And I read like one article that was like, at the time, the U.S. Army did not think this was a harmful bacteria to humans. So I'm like, if you thought it wasn't harmful, like, what were you expecting it to do then? Like, this is just playtime to spray people? Like, what do you expect? So anyway, surprisingly, on September 29th, somebody showed up at the hospital in San Francisco with a super rare and serious urinary tract infection. And then over the course of I think a few days, a total of 11 patients came in with this same serious and rare urinary tract infection. And then one of those patients ended up passing away. And so that was my first crazy experiment conducted on the US that the government was involved in. I just thought it was kind of crazy that it was just this whole general population. I even read somewhere that, in adults, this bacteria would show up in respiratory and urinary tract, but in children, it was like more intestinal issues. And so there was no documentation of children at the hospital, but yeah, and not to correlate the two, this is just me theorizing, but San Francisco, I just feel like has always been one of those areas where it's like the craziest stuff just comes up out of the ideas or the sects that start there, or
It is crazy. And that's where Michael Aquino is from, the high priest of the Temple of Set.
Oh, okay.
Was
Yeah.
the army in the army and worked at the Presidio Air Force Base in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it is a hotbed of Satanism there.
Hotbed.
Yes.
Hot mess.
Hell
Hotbed.
mouth. All right.
That's my first one.
Okay. Operation Sea Spray, spraying San Francisco's and giving them UTIs and all kinds of bacterial infections.
Yeah.
Great. Good.
Yeah.
So my first one, and these are in no particular order. I kind of put them from like least bad in my opinion to worst. So the least bad one in my list, which is terrible, is John C. Lilly. In 1961, he published a book called Man and Dolphin, and this book has 2 books in it, but Man and Dolphin is in there, about the intelligence of dolphins. Mm-hmm. And Carl Sagan reads this book and calls a meeting of scientists who are trying to figure out how to talk to aliens when the time comes. And this is what would become like SETI, I think.
Yeah.
Right? So they figure if they can talk to dolphins, they can talk to aliens. So NASA funds Lilly's dolphin lab. NASA gives him a bunch of money to do Communications Research Institute, which he called CRI. They go to St. Thomas in the Caribbean in 1963, and they get 3 dolphins, 2 girls and a boy named Pamela, Sissy, and Peter. And they're going to try and teach the dolphins how to speak English somehow. I don't know.
Okay.
So one of the ladies on the team, her name was Margaret Lovett. She gets the male dolphin and she like spends 24/7 with Peter, the dolphin. She puts her bed in the aquarium. She puts her desk right next to his tank. She's there all the time because she figures that the more exposure he has to her, the more he'll trust her and the more he'll be able to learn language, right? So she basically moves in with the dolphin. And
and they start having a relationship.
No, yes. Yeah. He seems to be learning better this way. Peter eventually comes to believe that Margaret is his mate and starts like humping her.
Yeah.
So this is messing up their school time. So they start taking the dolphin out and putting him in the tank with the 2 girl dolphins so he can get some relief and then go back to his lessons. But he's a young male dolphin and he wants to be in there all the time. So they figure out that moving Peter to the girls' tank is super time consuming, and they just figure that Margaret just needed to begin to relieve him herself.
Wow.
Science, everyone. So she's relieving Peter so they can continue his English lessons. John C. Lilly goes to a party and he meets the wife of the producer of the show Flipper, who gives him LSD. And this gives him the idea to give it to the dolphins. So he's injecting dolphins with acid. He's taking acid. They're all tripping together with the dolphins. And the magazine Hustler gets wind of this experiment. And they wrote like an article about Margaret and Peter in a SEXEY way.
Okay.
Okay. So
yep.
Great. Tripping with the dolphins. Hustler finds out. So then Carl Sagan gets wind of what's happening down there with his money and his credibility, and he comes to visit. And he is not happy. He's like, I did not give you money to trip with dolphins and have sexy times with aquatic mammals. So they shut down the lab in 1966, and Peter had to go to another lab, and he actually swam to the bottom of his tank and he stopped breathing because he was separated from Margaret, who he thought that he was mated to.
Oh, I feel
That
sad for
I know.
Peter.
That
He
is
was heartbroken.
that's the end of that little science experiment.
I
Great.
am fascinated with dolphins. I know that that Lily guy was out there, but dolphins are kind of fascinating.
I love all marine mammals. Like they are super fascinating, and I've heard reports where they can actually like heal you of certain things, like because of their sonar, can break up
Hmm.
cysts and kidney stones and all kinds of things in your body
Wow.
that yeah
Yeah,
they
I
can
guess because they're
help.
shooting out like some type of like frequency
Yeah.
that we are not able to do.
Yeah.
We don't have that ability.
So I would love to hear some experiments about wild dolphins that are not on drugs and not being, molested by scientists.
Yikes. Yeah. Okay. I had heard about that Lily guy before. I never went the dolphin route, even though I love dolphins and I loved orcas. I kind of went an orca route.
Hmm.
But yeah, I love dolphins though. I think it's like they're so close to us.
Yeah.
Well, that's sad. I feel bad for Peter. Uh, well, I'm going to talk about the next experiment. This is the least amount of information I know about the five,
Okay.
but I didn't have mine in order, but I thought this one was interesting. So in 1964, there was a doctor in, I believe it was New York. It was New York because the New York posted an article on it and recently, and it was like New York Post, um, New York City's forgotten cancer scandal. And so there was this doctor who had been in Africa. He was an immunologist and he was in Africa and he was injecting live cancer cells into African patients who already had like diseases that he was treating. So he wanted to see how the live cancer cells would react to certain diseases. And so that was happening in Africa. And I, it's funny to me, like today, how people are like, oh, we don't go to Africa and give, diseases to people. And it's like, yes, we've been doing this for a really long time. But this is like one of those cases where it's like, yeah, New York City has this forgotten cancer scandal where this doctor was employed to go do this and to carry out these experiments. And so he came back to the US and he was working at the hospital at Sloan Kettering Hospital. And I have to read this to you because I was just like, it was amazing to me the language that they used, but it was him and three other physicians that all got together and decided to start injecting patients at this hospital with live cancer cells. And so, what they would say, let's see. So, in a Brooklyn study, Southam and his partners, like I just said, there's two other partners with him, decided to avoid, quote, the phobia and ignorance that surrounds the word cancer by telling patients they were getting human cells growing in test tubes.
Ooh.
So they weren't like disclosing what they were actually doing to these patients. They were just like, you're too stupid to understand our research. So we're going to like twist the words around so you don't really understand what we're doing. And we're just going to inject you with live cancer cells. And so they did that. And anyway, it's like they're trying to, I think everything is like kind of compared to the Tuskegee syphilis study, like how when you're not, when you are doing harm and your oath is to do no harm,
Hmm.
uh,
You're not
you're,
just an objective observer.
no, and you also don't have the patient's health as your first priority, you know,
Right.
your research and, you know, your ego
Your
to discover
hypothesis.
something.
Yeah.
So anyway, he ended up like him and the three guys, they were found out and they just ended up retiring or resigning from their positions. But really, that was it. Like, I mean, I guess like just the laws back then, you know, were a little bit different. And, but I just thought that that was, oh, and this was interesting too. So like 30 years later, Chester Southam was interviewed about what he had done. And just to like, and what I'm trying to say, he said 30 years later, Southam remained convinced his research was both sound and scientifically important. He was unwavering in his belief that none of the patients injected with the cancer cells would contract the disease. And then when I asked, what if they had? He calmly replied, well, if they did, we would just cut it out. It's like,
Yeah.
so like you have no idea where this cancer cell would decide to,
Metastasize.
yeah, you're just going to cut out their ovary or their
Yeah.
pancreas. I mean, it's just like it's bananas to me. It's like they lose their brain, the
Because
science, they lose like the ability to really connect on a human level or understand.
because their worldview is mechanical.
Yes, exactly. Like you were saying earlier. Yeah.
What was
So,
that called again?
um, just Chester M. Southam, Southam.
Huh.
And it's not really an operation or a covert experiment. It's just this article, it's just this information that came up.
Okay. Well, I have one that's kind of like Operation Sea Spray,
Fun.
which was the spraying of St. Louis, Missouri with radioactive particles from the years 1953 to 1954 and 1963 to 1965. So, yes, you're so right. Like that, the period from uh, World War II to maybe like the 80s was super the heyday of mad scientists,
Yeah,
right?
yes. Yeah. And now, whatever they decided or discovered then, they're like, let's just go to town now and just not tell anybody we're doing anything.
Yeah. So this was part of the Manhattan-Rochester Coalition. U.S. Army scientists secretly sprayed St. Louis with radioactive particles for years to test chemical warfare technology. So the chemicals that they sprayed were zinc, cadmium sulfide, and radioactive particles. They also did this in Corpus Christi, and the chemical was dropped from airplanes over the city. So there's
Mhm.
some early CHEMTRAIL. Um, the Army put chemical sprayers on buildings, on schools, on public housing projects, and station wagons. And the people of St. Louis were told that the Army was testing smoke screens to protect cities from a RUSSIAN attack. So
Wow.
they always use that place as their like boogeyman,
Yeah.
right? RUSSIA is the huge boogeyman. So the greatest concentration of spraying in St. Louis was at the Pruitt Ego Complex, which was home to 10,000 low-income residents. They
Of
always do
course.
this on disenfranchised people. 70% of those residents were under age 12.
Wow.
So then they figured out that cancers were happening, um, people were dying. Minority communities were subjected to military radiological weapons testing project, and one of the compounds in the spray was called FP2266, which was manufactured by US Radium and was the same thing that killed and sickened many of US Radium employees. So, thousands of Missourians were unwillingly exposed to harmful materials in order to determine their health effects, and not just normal Missourians, the ones that couldn't do anything about it,
Yeah. They
right?
can't lawyer up. No.
Children,
Yeah.
they can't get away from it. They put it on the backs of cars and drove it around the neighborhoods
I
and
know
just,
when I was like station wagons.
yeah,
What?
they just fogged people with,
Wow. Yeah. Scary.
yes.
My next one is similar, but not really, but it has to do with dropping things out of the sky.
Okay.
So I don't know why for me, I just went like military, I was like, ooh, because
Because they
military.
have the most far-reaching like experiments on entire populations.
Yeah. So my next one's called Operation Big Itch.
Okay.
And so in September of 1954, Operation Big Itch rolled out as a series of tests at Dugway Proving Ground. I don't know. It's in Utah, and it's a U.S. Army facility used to test biological and chemical weapons. So they weren't doing this on the general population. They were doing this on their testing grounds. But the fact that they were doing this is just bonkers. So the test was determined to it was basically to cover patterns and survivability of the tropical rat flea for use in biological warfare.
Okay.
So you got this like rat flea,
Mm-hmm.
and what they did is the point of it was to take non-infected rat fleas, which I'm sure if they were actually to use this, these fleas would be infected. And they would load them into two different types of bombs and drop them and just see if the fleas would survive. And so the operation was a success. Yay. Because the fleas, when dropped from the airplane, they would attach themselves to the host. And so even if the bomb blew up, they would like go with the shards, or like with the material, and then they would fall. And then the US military would then determine like, would the fleas create some type of ground patterning, like how they would move about on the ground. And so, they did survive, and then they were active for 24 hours. So what a great weapon that
Mm-hmm.
they got in their back pocket there.
This reminds
Successful weapon.
this reminds me of Plum Island, where they
The
were,
ticks.
yeah, the ticks and the Lyme disease and everything.
That one was one of my first ones that I discovered that I was like, the government does what?
Yeah.
And, living here in the South, there's quite a few people that have Lyme disease. And I'm like, you know how that started? Every time I say Plum Island, they're like, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, man, great
Weaponized
documentary out there
bug.
on that one.
Okay, good one. Gross. Fleas. Ew. Bugs.
Yeah, really?
So you mentioned Tuskegee, and that was one of mine. So
Ah,
yeah,
okay.
because this one's really nefarious, and I can't believe it went on for like 30 years or more.
And I don't think people, unless you do research like you do, my grad program was all about like ethics, and like this was a huge one I had to study all the time. But I didn't know anything about it until grad school. And then I remember talking to a friend about government experiments recently in the last 2 years. And I brought this up, and she's like, what? And she's a smart girl. And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, we live in the South, and that was not that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's wild.
Yeah, it should be more well known than it is.
Yeah.
This this is called the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the NEGRO male. See, YouTube's got me know I don't even know what words I can say or can't say. So if it's questionable, I'm just gonna spell it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so untreated syphilis in the NEGRO male. And this was a study conducted between 1932 and 1972. So a super long thing.
Yeah.
By the US Public Health Service and the CDC on a group of 400 Black people with syphilis. And the subjects were completely unaware and were told they were receiving treatment for bad blood when they actually received no treatment at all. So they were involved in blood tests, x-rays, spinal taps, and autopsies when they died. And the goal was to observe the natural history of untreated syphilis. So they're taking people with syphilis, telling them, we're treating you, not treating them at all, and telling the doctors in the area, you can't treat these people in a different way because they're under our study. So they're actively impairing them from getting treatment elsewhere that they know for a disease that they know will kill them. Right?
Right.
So this is social Darwinism.
Oh, yeah.
So the scientists used to argue that, how do I even say this? Back in the oldie times of science, it was super racist. Mm-hmm. Because the theory of evolution is racist itself. So the old time scientists thought that Black men were perfectly suited for slavery because of their primitive nervous systems and did not feel pain like white people. They thought they were a different species. They thought they had overdeveloped genitals. So under this guise of free medical care for bad blood, which was a made-up thing, they actively worked to ensure that the subjects did not receive proper treatment for their syphilis. So then, rather than simply observing and documenting the progression of the disease, the researchers intervened by telling the participants they were being treated and also preventing them from seeking life-saving treatment. So then by 1947, penicillin had become standard treatment, but the Tuskegee participants were prevented from receiving it.
Wow.
Then by 1965, they said it was too late to give them the penicillin, which was another lie because they proved that you can give penicillin for syphilis at any time and it would help. So they were killing people, letting them die. The study lasted until 1972 and only 74 test subjects were still alive at that time. So out of 400 people, only 70 lived through this, and the rest died of the syphilis that they thought the army was treating them for. There was a class action lawsuit for $10 million paid to the surviving participants, and the last of those died in 2009. So that is a super sad day for the U.S. Army scientists.
Yeah.
And a gross, gross study.
Look like big jerks.
Yeah.
Man, that one's bad. Because it's painful too for them. You know, it was like, no wonder, you know, there's different cultures in the US and that in the last 2 or 3 years have been rallied together like, no, like I'm not going to do what you're asking me to do. Why should I trust you? I get it. You know, I understand 100%.
Yeah.
So my last two are they're as equally as like disturbing. So I'm just going to go with the one that my page is open.
Okay.
It's called the Holmesburg Prison. I knew nothing about this. It's a prison. It's currently shut down. It's just like a vacant building now, but it's in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And it was in the 1950s. This was a prison where they did experiments on the prisoners, which were 85% Black, in exchange for money. So like if you got so much money, like I think the standard pay in the prison for like work was like 15 cents to 25 cents. And then this doctor came in and wanted to do all these experiments that were these experiments were funded by chemical companies and pharmaceutical companies just to see like how anyway, I'll get into that, but they were offering like between $25 to $300 if you would offer up your body as a prisoner to be a test subject.
Because
So that's how they
prisoners make perfect lab rats, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So what happened, there was in this prison, there was a outbreak of athlete's feet. And so they called in this dermatologist. His name was Albert Kigman. And he came to the prison to treat this outbreak. And he said that there's this like famous quote where he was like, it felt like a sea of skin. You know, that's like all he saw was like this skin. And he said it was like a farmer sees land.
Ew,
And he just
oh, that is how they see it.
couldn't wait to like just get his hands on the skin of these prisoners and try out different things. And so he started immediately. And like I said, he was there for like 20 years, 25 years. And they used the prisoners as testing grounds for lotions, chemical warfare agents. They would pull out their fingernails. Sometimes the prisoners were just given a dollar amount and said, you know, you've got to do this experiment and you just have to do what we tell you to do. And because of the money, they would just say yes and do it. And some of them were like, they put, this one guy was put this topical ointment on his back and it like discolored his back and was like burning his back. This one's really gross, but they wanted to see if they were to sew on a body part onto like the back of a human, if it would start like meshing into the body and start operating. And so like they sewed on like, I don't know what body part it was. So I'm not going to make
centipede stuff.
Huh?
This is human centipede stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And they did it on his back, you know, so like he can't get to it, you know, it's like, oh, it's just so disgusting and weird. And so anyway, there was just a lot of like hierarchical like racism within the prison too. And so some of the prison guards that were of color would try to help some of the prisoners, and there was just this like huge divide in it. But anyway, they ended up having to shut it down. I don't really have why they shut it down, but word got out like they were doing all these experiments to these prisoners. And again, they like linked it because I'm sure the race, just, you know, similarity there to the Tuskegee experiment as well. So, and again, this is like in the 1950s to 70s. And then in 72, we've got down in, was it Alabama that they were doing that experiment on that population? So it's like they can't stop. They can't stop, won't stop.
How much money would you need to let someone sew a foot onto your back?
To see if it like, if the toes would wiggle?
Yeah. Is there a dollar amount?
I'm thinking. Yeah, it's just like, I found a YouTube, it was hard to find information on this. And I'm sure it's because like all of these corporations, plus it was state funded. I mean, this is a state funded prison system. So it was really hard to find a lot of information on it, but they do have a documentary out that I've not seen that I think I'm probably going to watch now. But I found this girl YouTube video and I watched it, and it was enlightening, insightful.
Okay. Well, my next one is kind of like that, except for they didn't pay anyone. They were using POWs.
Ooh, no.
And this is called Unit 731, which was, you heard that one?
Yeah, that's the one I was talking about earlier.
Oh, okay. The Japanese one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh gosh.
So.
Ugh. Ugh.
Japanese World War II. This is kind of like the mirror to Mengele and his experiments in the concentration camps.
Okay.
It was biological and chemical warfare. Unit 731 was an assembly line of weaponized diseases that could have killed everyone on Earth several times over if these had gotten out.
Wow.
So prisoners were test subjects and walking dead disease incubators. They would do things like frostbite testing. So they would take prisoners and put their limbs and submerge them in ice water until they're frozen solid, and then use different methods for rapid rewarming to see if they could cure frostbite quickly. So they would like put scalding water on it, they would put open fire on it, or they would just leave it untreated.
And these people are a lot, like they're conscious going through this.
This is the people they're telling us to follow. Follow the science. Follow them to
Yeah.
where? This is
Yeah.
nasty. So they would also use vivisection of conscious prisoners. So they'd get POW Chinese, which they called logs, and they would just dissect them without anesthesia because they wanted to study the operations of their living systems.
Like they just cut them open.
Yeah. Yeah. They just strap them down and go to work because you're just a log. You're just a cog. You're just
A log.
biological machine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So they purposely infected people with cholera, plague, and had their organs removed for examination. Limbs were amputated and reattached to the other side of the body, like you were talking about. That happened in Pennsylvania or New York?
Pennsylvania. That was Pennsylvania.
Okay. Other limbs were crushed or frozen or had their circulation cut off to observe the gangrene process. Prisoners were fired upon from varying ranges by different weapons to study wound patterns and penetration depths. Knives, flamethrowers, gas chambers, nerve gas. Heavy objects were dropped for crush injury studies. This is gross. They did food and water deprivation and injected them with mismatched human and animal blood to study the clotting process.
Oh, weird. Okay.
They were exposed to prolonged X-ray exposure, burns. Studies on the effect of G forces had them loading people into centrifuges until they died. They were infected with syphilis. That's one of the scientists' favorite. And left untreated, and also made to RAPE fellow prisoners to infect them.
Oh.
Female prisoners were forcibly impregnated so that weapon and trauma experiments could be done on them specifically so they could see what it was like on the mother and the fetus.
Wow.
Germ warfare to them was very important. And to breed the most lethal strains possible, the patients were monitored for rapid onset of symptoms and were bled to death, and the blood used to infect others. So they would give people all these diseases, and the people who recovered quickly were just put down. And the ones who had the worst symptoms and the most virulent strains of these things, they bled them and injected that blood into other people so that they could make it stronger.
Wow. Like breeding that blood.
Yeah. And then this one reminded me of the one that you were just talking about the fleas. So they gave these infected people fleas, and they put the fleas in bombs, and they dropped them over the Chinese village of Kuzu. So here's another flea bombs.
Flea bombs. Common bioweapon.
Yeah. So you've got your tick bombs and your flea bombs and whatever other bug bombs. And this all happened between 1931 and 1945.
Wow.
That is Unit 731, The Horrors of Japan's human experiment program.
Yeah, it's pretty gnarly. So I think I actually looked that up like 2 years ago, and I had not read 1984 yet. I didn't read 1984 until 2020. And then when Winston is put that cage on him, you know, and they put the rats in it, I was like, there's no way that's real. And then I Google it, of course, and it's obviously real. And there was this story of this, it was like an ancient torture device that the South American, like Peru or Brazil or something, used to do to their prisoners. And they would like allow the rats to like go up into the body's like bottom areas, you know, like, and then, oh, it's so bad, like so bad. And like once you read it, you can't ever forget about it. And it's probably one of the scariest things I've ever, like, just having a rat like eating your eyeball. And
It's so gross.
I know, it's so bad. Why do humans do this to each other? I don't know.
Because they're godless.
They are, yeah. There's just evil, like the vessel is just run by something evil.
Because
Yeah.
if evolution is true and that's their worldview, then nothing is wrong, nothing is right. It's all just atoms.
Yeah.
It's just a mechanical thing that you can rip apart and
What
study.
a delusion. Yeah.
So what is your last one?
So for my last one,
Okay.
I would like to present to you the Willowbrook State School
Okay.
from 1947 to 1987. I'd like to go ahead and preface this story for anyone interested. There is a wonderful
Rivera?
Rivera,
Yeah.
Geraldo Rivera special
Okay.
on this state school that you must see. It's a must see. It's on YouTube. So Willowbrook was a state-supported, which this is important to understand, state-supported institution for mentally disabled children and adults, but it started out for children. And it was located on Staten Island in New York. I immediately wrote that Geraldo did a TV report on the school where he witnessed mentally handicapped children laying naked with their own feces smeared on them, and it smelled of filth, disease, and death. And so when you watch the video, you'll just be like, you can get a good visual of what was happening in this. It looked like a haunted, like, horror house. And it was just run by these state employees who, it was majorly overstaffed. I think that they said it was like supposed to only hold like 4,000, and by the time it was shut down, there was like 6,000 to 7,000 people in it.
It just seems like every state-run institution for mentally handicapped people is some kind of torture
Oh,
palace,
it's like,
right?
do you want to direct a horror film? This is the narrative,
Yeah.
and like go from here.
Yeah.
Easy peasy.
Because those people can't, like I said, it's the people who can't fight back. They can't talk back. They can't say, well, they're doing experiments on me, because they're already there because people think they're crazy.
Right. And they're helpless. You know, they
Yeah.
can't speak for themselves, and they know they're not going to get told on. And if they did say something out of line, you'll just be like, "Oh, you can't listen to her," you know? So, a New York Times article recently, like they're still writing articles about this place because it was so bonkers. Came out last year on Willowbrook, stating that the school abused children and adults, finding scars, bruises. Some were strapped to chairs or in their beds for like weeks. Others were left to rock. And you'll see that in like this show. They just like rock themselves back and forth on the floor. And most of them are, you know, they're like in rags or they're not bathed. And then one man was actually reported to have been placed in like a scalding hot bath And then he had to go to the hospital and he had second-degree burns all over his body. Just like completely neglected and not taken care of and just abused. And apparently, when Robert F. Kennedy was senator, he went there and he was quoted as saying that the facility borders on the line of a snake pit.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just like this hellhole, like in real life, just like this is hell.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to put these innocent humans into it and just like make this thing just awful. And so it became a national story in 1972 when Geraldo aired actual live footage from inside the facility. And it was the children's ward, which makes it really sad. And so the facility closed down for good in 1993. But then I do remember this movement of like, what do we do with these people? You know, like how, so say you don't have the funds to send your daughter or your sister or your uncle who is mentally handicapped, where do they go? And
Mm-hmm.
like, do you take care of them? Or if the state's not going to take care of them and you can't afford private care for them, like what happens? So there was just a lot of controversy over, you know, the reason why it was so neglected is because taxes, you know, weren't funneled into the school properly. But it comes to, you know, it just comes down to like, again, people in politics and at the governmental level do not, like you were saying, view humans as material objects, like not to be cared for.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in that state or if you're under that care, you're not going to receive care.
Right. You're just a log.
You're a lot.
You're a useless eating log. And before we get to the last one, I just want to make the dishonorable mention because we're talking about care facilities for mentally ill people. MK Ultra is probably, besides from what we're going through right now, the biggest science experiment ever put on people. And we could do a whole series on MK Ultra. And I mentioned Mengele, the NAZI experiments, which all those doctors were brought over in Project Paperclip and put to work in mental institutions. Ewan Cameron, Jose Delgado, who did experiments like putting microchips into the brains of bulls so he can remote control them.
Wow.
And MK Ultra became all these separate projects like Project Monarch, and this is where you get your trauma-based mind control pop stars and everything. So that is its own like thing that we
Series.
can. Yeah. What else did I have on here? Okay, yeah, that's pretty much it. And so the last one is super depressing and gross. It is called Kinsey's Table 34. Do you know who Alfred Kinsey is?
No.
Okay.
Should I know?
He was a zoologist. And so there again, it's the mindset of studying humans as just another animal, like a lab rat. I call him the father of Coomerism and sex ed in schools. And he is the scientific basis for this sexual revolution.
You're all over the place with this man.
Yeah. So he wrote a book in 1948 called Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. And this textbook is used to define normal and healthy sexual behavior. And there is a table in his book of data that he collected called Table 34. And it's about children and ORGASMS. So they recorded, I can't even I don't even know how to get this out. So he felt the stigma around adult and child asexual relations was like hysteria. And NAMBLA loves this guy.
Hold on, what? Who? Say it again.
NAMBLA. Okay, so look that up later. So they love him. He laid the scientific basis for PEDO stuff. He felt young boys needed guidance from older men. He used, he thought children and animals together was a good idea.
Children and animals.
Yeah. His disciples migrated to a lot of universities, especially New York, Pennsylvania, and San Francisco. And I mean, this is basically the weaponization of sex, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of his goals was to denormalize the hetero family unit. He worked with Nazi PEDO named Dr. Fritz von Balusek, who had a diary full of scientific sex abuse done on children.
Oh.
Balusek had stacks of notebooks of research, and this is the foundation for the structure of sex ed public schools in America. His book
Wow.
has defined what is normal sexual behavior, and this is the curriculum taught in your public school right now. So Kinsey became integral in the legal system as an authority on sexual crimes and what was psychotic behavior and what wasn't. So this guy who has a table of children and their so-called ORGAS, whatever, is helping people make policies on how do you punish sex offenders. Let's see.
Okay, I actually know a lot about Kinsey.
Okay.
I didn't realize I had to learn about him in school. There's a movie about him and Liam Neeson plays him.
I watched that a long
Okay.
time ago. Do you remember anything from the movie?
I do. They made it in the movie, they made it him more of like this professor type that would like just want to normalize sex, and then he ends up having a relationship with a male student who then the male student ends up having sex with Kinsey's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just this like triangular love thing drama. But they never mentioned in this movie about children being involved, but it was more like men trying to normalize like men and women's arousal patterns. And he just wanted to remove the stigma of sex.
That's what the movie is getting at. Yeah. And so what he would do, like everybody that he come across, he have this questionnaire and he would just like ask them all of these personal questions about their sexual habits.
Yeah.
Right. And he's under the guise of collecting data. But when he published his book, the people that he mostly got his data to ascertain what is normal sexual behavior were prisoners and prostitutes and other fringe
Types.
groups.
Yeah.
Yeah, that do not represent normalcy whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're getting a sicko to, testify if another sicko should get a lighter sentence. He also has connections with Crowley. He was integral in legalizing PORN. So
Wow.
Hugh Hefner was a disciple of Kinsey and called himself Kinsey's pamphleteer.
Wow. I did not know this about him.
Yes. He paid people to let him experiment with their kids. So he knew people that were sexualizing kids and he would give them money for the data and he would actually like supply them with like stopwatches and stuff like that so he could get his science for his tables.
That's dark. This is dark.
Okay. I don't even know if this is going to be okay for YouTube. Oh, well. No.
Well, let's try it.
Let's see. He died of a testicle disease from his masochism because he was just too rough on his junk. That he He died.
He
Yes.
brought it on himself.
Yes. So his book is on par
Wow.
like with like Mein Kampf or Mao's Red Book in books that damaged society. He was on a mission funded by Carnegie, Ford, Rockefeller, Guggenheim, and taxpayer money to travel around the US trying to get lighter sentences for sex offenders and incorporate Coomer curriculum. So Kinsey had an institute. Let's see. Okay. This is just like so hard to get through right now. He said 70% of men have been to prostitutes. He was integral in helping to legalize abortion. He trained child molesters to do it with a stopwatch. He needed the data. He says children are sexual from birth. Descriptions of child orgasms sound like torture if you read it.
Oh.
I mean, the table in it's like has like billions.
I didn't know children could do that. Like maybe I'm just.
How is that legal? How is that funded by taxpayer? I don't know. He says they're sexual from birth. He was a self-mutilator. He was looking for Crowley's lost diaries and maybe had a correspondence with him. He visited Abbey Thelema after Crowley died. He was on the cover of Time magazine. Playboy donates money to Kinsey Institute, and over 9,000 images in Playboy and Penthouse include sexual assault on children in the form of comics. So, like, have you ever seen a Playboy?
I mean, I'm sure I've seen,
stupid little cartoons and stuff like any other magazine, but a great portion of them are jokes about molesting
children.
Yes. Like kidnapping, flashing, innuendo, especially evil Santa Claus, like come sit on Santa's lap and stuff like that.
Ew.
And then there was actually this running comic and hustler called Chester the Molester that had all this stuff in it. Okay, so yeah.
I guess that's where like the name Chester, everybody's like, ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Institute for Advanced Study of Human Sexuality in San Francisco was started by Kinsey's lover, Godel B. Pomeroy, and it is considered the Harvard of human sexuality training and creates all of the PhDs and master's degrees of sex educators who go out into the public school. Kinsey trained sexologists purposely go into the Catholic clergy during the transition to Vatican II to train priests in sexuality and PORN.
This sounds great.
So this is where you are getting your children, when you send them to public school and they give you sex ed, it's all coming from Kinsey and his data collected by molesting children. And there's tables of it in his book called, what is it? Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, 1948.
1948.
Mm-hmm. So right after World War II.
Yeah.
This is all happening.
Yeah. If you guys have not seen that movie, though, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. If I'm recalling the movie, so he had a father who was like this hellfire preacher.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Like John Lithgow. And they paint Kinsey as just this boy who wants to be natural and live in nature. And he was a Boy Scout, but he was doing things with the fellow Boy Scouts in the woods. And it's just so gross. Like, they tried to normalize him, but he was a creeper.
Yeah, they tried to paint him as this, like, obviously, if you're Liam Neeson playing any character, you're going to be likable.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like, he was a little weird, but it's only because he really was invested in his work and he loved his work. And, yeah.
He
that
just
was,
wanted better sex between married couples. I mean, that's all he
that's
wanted.
right. I mean, what he was doing was noble and
Hmm.
kind,
Hmm.
and he was a pioneer of his time.
Right. So if you wanted to look at two videos about this, one was called Kids of Table 34 and the other one was called Kinsey Syndrome. And that is pretty much the worst science experiment that I could find.
Yeah, anything with kids, man.
Hmm. So,
That's funny. Both you and I, our very last ones were kids involved.
hmm so great sciencing, everybody. That was good job.
I'm glad you're out there as a scientist, doing the good work for us all.
Hmm. So that is our show tonight. We leave you with next week we are doing Walt Disney, Hollywood's Dark Prince, and all things Deep Secrets of Disney, which I am probably the world's premier expert on dark Disney. I don't know anybody else who's been studying it longer than me. Um, I've got
I'm
two.
just gonna sit here and let you talk. I'm gonna dress up like a
Oh yeah, be a
Disney
princess.
character.
Yeah.
But I'm just literally here for the party. I'm gonna bring popcorn and I'm just gonna watch you.
No, you're gonna get some notes from this book, and we're
I
gonna talk
am.
about it. So, thank you everyone for watching. I'm not sure how well this is going to go on YouTube. Maybe it'll just be up for one night, or I don't
I'm
know.
glad you guys got
I
to
don't
see
know
my
what I could
cat.
say or not.
I know, we're figuring it out.
Yeah. But have a good night, everyone.